presentation by the amazing Andrew Tolley from Coffee Knowledge Hub and Morten from CoffeeMind. We're very excited to have you. If you're standing, please come and take a seat. There's lots of space here. Come closer, it's very, very cold. Over to you when you're ready.
Yeah, gather in close and you can warm each other up. Thank you very much for coming and watching us in this amazing festival. I hope you've all drunk a lot of coffee and yeah, welcome. I'll let you gather in before I start. Just posing for a photo. Okay, welcome everyone. So it's Morten and I, and we're going to talk about sensory assessment in coffee. Firstly, can everyone hear me okay? It sounds like the microphone's working. Yep, back. Yes, cool. So an important topic, and one that both Morten and I are very passionate about. And you can see here, I've got various things on this slide. I just wanted to highlight some of those to say, I'm firstly from the Coffee Knowledge Hub. So check that out. That's the only business promotion I'll do. I'm also a CVA ambassador. CVA stands for Coffee Value Assessment System. It's something I'll be talking about in more detail today. I'm CVA for Cuppers certified. I'm an SCA board vice president. I just bring that up because I've been involved in the Coffee Value Assessment System. I've been an ambassador, a proponent of it for, I think, 3.5 years now. Looking at Daniela here from the SCA, so just confirming. And then I'm also a LAPS curator, LAPS sensory judge, cup tasting champion, green buyer, roast and QC. So those last things, the only really reason that they're relevant is because I come at this very much from an industry perspective. So when I think about the Coffee Value Assessment System, when I think about sensory assessment in coffee, then I'm interested in how we as a coffee industry can benefit from improving our understanding of sensory assessments. And that's why I'm here. Morten, on the other hand, different perspective. So when we were talking about this presentation at the Coffee Festival, I mentioned to the organizer that we could do something on the Coffee Value Assessment System, and they said that sounds boring. So they thought, how could we spice that up a little bit? And I thought, well, who has strong views on sensory assessment in coffee, very well researched strong views, and who would be a scary person to have on stage to maybe disagree with some of the things that I'm about to say? And that's why Morten is here. So I'm looking forward to what he has to say. And I think, you know, that the message here is very much that this is a relatively new way that we're thinking about what is coffee value, and how to assess coffee value. It's been out in the general public for 2 years now. 1 year was a beta test, which I'll talk about in a little more detail. But really, we still need to analyze it. We still need to think about it critically, and we need to think with the bigger overall objective of what is the purpose of understanding value in coffee. Our sensory assessment in coffee is important as part of a system to communicate the value in coffee. So that is a critical statement. And when we think about value, what is value? Okay, it's the right price. So if you go into a cafe, you can pay $2 for a coffee, you can pay $8 for a coffee. If you pay $8 for that coffee, are you satisfied? Are you happy? Do you have do you think that it was worth that $8? That is one form of value. If you're a coffee producer and you sell your coffee for $2 per pound or $50 per pound, do you get enough value from either of those prices? You know, is it enough to justify the work that you've put into it to cover your costs, but also to afford the lifestyle that you want as a coffee producer? So that's another form of value. It's value from the buyer's perspective, value from the seller's perspective. Now, what we realize, especially coffee and in the coffee industry generally, is that for there to be sustainability and viability of this as an industry, to inspire people to continue to produce coffee, to sell coffee, for all of us to work in this industry, we all need to get value, and there needs to be an equitable distribution of that value across the value chain. So that's where we come to this presentation today. We're talking about understanding the product more, and that is what sensory assessment helps us do. You understand the product more, you understand the markets, and you can maximize value. And it's a constant loop, okay? The more we understand the product, the more we understand the markets, the better we can maximize value, and the better we can return to understanding the products. So the SCA in 2023 launched a new system to assess coffee value. It was launched as a beta at the SCA Expo in Portland in 2023. It was then in this beta form for around a year, and then turned into a standard in June in 2024. So that meant that over 800 people gave feedback on the Coffee Value Assessment system to try and improve it, and that feedback was incorporated before it was launched as a standard. So, 3 dot points here. The Coffee Value Assessment is about building a more detailed picture of how different individuals value different coffees, and from that establish trends and market preferences. It is a value discovery system that allows room for multiple interpretations of specialty as opposed to one dogmatic target. It's not just about an 82 or an 84. It's aligned with modern sensory science practices and use across many other industries, and Morten will talk in more detail about that, or how it's not. And effectively what it is a holistic, high-resolution picture of a specific coffee across 4 assessment types, completed separately to avoid bias. And it's a full evaluation that acts as a value discovery tool, creating a transparent record of a coffee's valued attributes. So we've talked about value, but we also have to think about attributes. So really there was a system, and when people talk about specialty coffee and the definition of specialty coffee, there's a sort of industry standard definition. It's a coffee that scores above 80. That's a single definition of what quality is. It's a single kind of attribute. Coffee is above 80. If it's an 82, it's a specialty coffee. If it's a 79, it's not a specialty coffee. But it's a very limited way to understand what quality is, and to understand the value of an actual coffee. It's in fact a not very genuine way, or even objective way to qualify what a coffee actually is. So instead of thinking about coffee as having one quality, that singular concept of quality, you have to think about it as having qualities. And so qualities and attributes, they're a synonym. You can use them interchangeably, but we're using the word attributes because it helps us think about all the different aspects of a coffee, the attributes, the features, the qualities of a coffee that give that coffee value. Now I'm going to run through, this is the system. There are 4 different assessments: physical, descriptive, affective, and extrinsic. I've got 15 minutes for this presentation, so I'm going to give you just a flash talk on the 2 sensory assessments, which are the descriptive and the affective. But you also should realize there's a physical and an extrinsic. And I've got a QR code at the end, which will link to the SCA website, where you can basically read the entire protocol. It's only 60 pages. It's really good reading, and I highly recommend it. So, the descriptive form. This is an evolution. This whole system, by the way, is an evolution. It was launched in 2023, and it's an evolution from a form that was first released in 2004. And so there's quite a big change for the industry to understand. It felt like quite a big paradigm shift, a monumental shift to suddenly bring in this whole new system for assessing coffee. But it does draw on some of the things that we're used to in the 2004 form, but it improves upon them for different reasons. So the descriptive form is the objective form. It is using the old attributes that we used to capture in the sensory assessment on the 2004 form. So we have fragrance, aroma, we have flavor, aftertaste, we have acidity, we have sweetness, and we have mouthfeel. And the idea is you rate the total intensity of the combined attributes. So if you find a coffee and it has a high intensity of mouthfeel, then you think to yourself, does this coffee have a low, medium, or high intensity of mouthfeel? And it will help you to rank intensity. And it's been found that that is a much more objective and repeatable way, particularly amongst a small group of panelists, to objectively assess a coffee in terms of using this descriptive form. So you choose up to the number of specific descriptors. So there's a system called check all that apply, or CAPTA. And these descriptors are based on the SCA's flavor wheel. So it's a standardized set of descriptors. The idea is that you check the ones that apply. There's some for taste balance, or taste descriptors, like sweetness, acidity, bitterness. And there are also others which describe flavor. And then you have a number that you can choose, up to 2 or 3. It's defined in the standards. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the empty space, and that empty space is so that you can write your own flavor notes for a coffee as well. So it's important, particularly when you think about this system, because this system is being used across the coffee value chain, which means across the globe. So if you're in Asia, you've got quite different taste notes, and you can apply, like I was in a summit in China, and I was asked a question from the audience. Someone was like, why is there only one description for tea? And she said, we have 20 kinds of black tea. So she could write down 20 different black tea flavors that she wanted to in this form to apply to her local region. But you can also have a reference set of samples on each of those flavor descriptors as well. The affective form. Affective means liking, it's emotions. So this is probably the biggest shift for people, both mentally, in terms of conceptually understanding the coffee value assessment system, but also the shift from the 2004 form. We're moving away from this concept of quality is what I define it as, and when I say that it is this quality, then it's an objective measure of what quality is. Change that language. It's now a 9-point hedonic scale, so it's like a liking scale, okay? So this does tally up to points if you want to use it for that, but you are rating your impression of quality for each section by filling in the corresponding bubble in the form. So, I'm not sure if it's clear here, but you can see, again, we have fragrance, aroma, flavor, aftertaste, acidity, sweetness, mouthfeel, and then underneath that, you've got overall impression, because you're thinking about this in terms of the overall impression. And then underneath that, you've got uniformity, which is sort of a discriminative test. Just adding some words that Morten's going to talk about in more detail. And then you've got defects as well. Okay, so that's a big change as well, because defects in uniformity and overall impression were on the old form. They're only on the affective form here, because they're only relevant to whether you like or have a higher liking or a lower liking for a coffee. And again, you've got room to write notes, your final impression, and mark down those defective cups. And then you can put these numbers into a calculator or into a manual version or a digital version. You can put your scores in, and then it spits out a overall score for a coffee. And these overall scores, it does that up to 100. It does roughly correlate with sort of 80 being a higher scoring coffee that you'd more associate with specialty coffee. But it also, importantly, it gives you a much broader range. So the reality is, as an industry, we often qualify, like the majority of coffees, we have a 100-point scale technically with the 2004 form, but most coffees score between 82 and maybe 86, 88. So we're using this 100-point scale, we're scoring them within 4 to 6 points of each other. This system does help cuppers to be much broader in their descriptors, much freer in how they evaluate a coffee and think about their evaluation of that coffee in a fundamentally different way. Now, it's a new value discovery paradigm. The 4 assessments we've talked about, so physical, descriptive, affective, extrinsic, that is how you discover the full value of a coffee. And I think fundamentally, to really understand this, I'm flashing through it because of some time constraints, but really that concept that we're looking to understand a coffee better in a much more holistic way is what we're getting at. Because previously, this information about a coffee was the kind of pinnacle of coffee knowledge that you needed to have. It's in El Salvador, it's washed, it's an SL28. If you could rattle that off as a barista in a cafe, then you were the expert. It doesn't mean anything. And it wasn't that long ago. I mean, it was only 2007 when a barista won the World Barista Championships with a single origin coffee. I mean, that was revolutionary at the time, just to have a coffee from one origin, not a blend. And then roast went later, and then we started discovering varietals and different species and different processing methods. So the coffee world's changed in such a significant way. So this is now the information that's available about a coffee. Far more detailed. Yep, you need to know what the flora and fauna is on your farm in order to understand the impact on the coffee flavor. So there are squirrels, that means it's going to taste better. That was a joke. But so yes, so what this value discovery paradigm, what these 4 different assessment sheets allow us to do is speak the same language about a coffee. Okay, we have to understand all of the elements of a coffee in order to translate that for our relative markets. So it's no longer a case, well, we've got to understand that, so that with the coffee value assessment system, it's a global system, it's a global coffee world, but we're in a very fragmented coffee world as well. We're in the Nordic, we're in the Scandinavian countries here now, and we have very different taste preferences, different styles of coffee work here. If you go to Asia, different styles of coffee. If you go to Middle East, different styles of coffee. If you come to Gothenburg, different styles of coffee, which roaster you're going to, which supermarket you're buying coffee from, all of these things. Like, there are so many different flavors and tastes and preferences. And this system helps a farmer to describe everything that's relevant for all these different markets and then discover where that coffee should end up. So which coffee is right for this market, for this roaster, and which coffee is right for a different roaster in a different market. And that is the point here. So it's the SCA Coffee Value Assessment Protocol. You can scan that QR code. You can go to sca.coffee. You can /value-assessment. That will bring up the entire protocol in standard. So you can review it in your own time. There are courses you can do as well to really understand it. And there's also a very good YouTube channel which goes through this presentation actually in a lot more detail to explain each of the elements of the Coffee Value Assessment. It's on SCA's YouTube. So it's really worth looking at. And what I'm going to do now is hand over to Morten. And Morten is going to dig more into the sensory science and science of the coffee value, or sensory assessment in coffee. So I'll let him get set up.
Yes. So I just need this one. Oh, that's the power, right? Oh no, that's the HDMI. It's really.
And I should say as well that we're hoping for some stimulating questions and conversation after this. So that's why we're actually rushing through the presentation, so that you've got at least 15 minutes, so we can have a detailed discussion and dig into some of the things we're talking about. Wasn't it?
Great, thanks a lot. Let's see. Is it? Yes. Just. All right, thanks a lot. Just first of all, how many of you have heard about the CVA system before today? How many of you have practical experience with filling out the forms? Okay. Great. I just wanted to, and how many of you already know what a triangular cupping is? Okay, great. It's just to, because, yeah, as Andrew said, we have a very short time to rush through this, and it's actually, it's a very big subject, so that's why I just wanted to know how much I can assume. So just really shortly, yes, I have a scientific background, and yes, that is my perspective. That said, I have been teaching more than 2,000 people in coffee roasting in small groups of 6 to 8 hands-on at London School of Coffee and in Copenhagen since 2007. And I've been consulting around the world, so I actually have a very, 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 very practical approach as well. And what I care about, the only thing I found I care about is not wasting anybody's time. And so, and I found when I came from university and went into the coffee community, it was just, there was something that struck me as, it was weird because I could read long articles and I could hear long talks. And when I was done, there was a lot said and nothing of it was wrong, but I was just left with, what was the point? What am I actually to do with this? How does this translate into my situation to solve my specific solutions? And this is something that has been almost 2 decades long wondering, what's going on here? Why do we have so much noise in the education system? Why is it that people talk a long time and people can be left with no clue on what actually to do and how to solve it? And this is what I found, that my educational background is not just putting me on a pedestal to kind of be on some kind of ivory tower, but it's actually deeply practical. I need to make sure exactly what the point is. And this is why I'm using, and I'm really careful to do this. I pride myself on trying at least. You tell me if I succeed. I don't want to invent a single thing. I don't want to come up with anything, because that can only be second best compared to somebody who already did something. And that's typically big breakthroughs in science. Newton did this, Rosemary Pangborn did this with sensory science. In economics, you also have people who came up with a really simple thing that was extremely deep. So we are looking, I think in science, we are looking for the really simple models that all of a sudden makes things extremely clear. And sensory science is one of those traditions. And that's why I'm so worried when I see people using sensory science and then adding a little thing of their own. I'm trying not to do that. And it might be in some of the illustrations here that you see, it seems like I'm a bit rude or kind of too extreme, but please, this is just to kind of get the subject going, right? And I'm actually trying to find metaphors and graphical metaphors that actually makes a point that it's important. And it's also important to say that Andrew and I, we actually good friends behind the scenes. We've been working at London School of Coffee together many years ago and kept the contact. So there's no beef between us personally. So hopefully we succeed just putting the concepts out here, discuss them, because also it's not your personal project. Coming up with it, it's somebody else. But so hopefully we are able to just put out the concept and let the concept be in a kind of dialogue rather than any personal things. But so one of the things, of course, that is a bit provocative is to say that when I see cupping forms, the old 2004, but also the new, I see paper piles and also the tooth fairy. And there's actually a point, there's a theory of scientists who has come up with a concept called tooth fairy science, which is sciences, or it's systems where you create a lot of numbers. But there's actually the last question, okay, you can do a lot of impressive numbers, but what is actually a relationship between the numbers and the object of investigation? And there's a lot of sensory data that is actually like chasing the tooth fairy. It's data that doesn't really exist. And it's so dangerous to do this because it's wasting everybody's time. We are small businesses with limited time and limited resources. We cannot waste our time. We've got problems enough. So please, in education, we need clarity and actionability. So this is my kind of first slide, because at least I think SCA needs to prove for, conceptual reasons that this is not the case. I need to see something where they kind of convince me that this is not the case before I want to spend time on it. And in order to do this short, I just want to remind you, sensory science is not necessarily about very important or deep statistics. It can be, for sure. But as I said, big sciences has some really simple concept at the core. And in sensory science, you have 3 simple concepts. And it's called a stage gate model, which means that it's important that you ask the first question first. And if and only if you get something important here, you will go to the next. Because otherwise, if you're not sure there are differences between the samples that you are describing, then you might end up spending a lot of money describing something that's not even different at all, and then you've wasted time and money, right? So first you have 3 steps. The first is called discriminative, the next one is descriptive, and the last one is called hedonic. So that's in sensory and consumer science. This is discriminative, descriptive, and affective tests. And this is a very, very simple model everybody can understand very quickly. Is there a relevant difference or not, right? Does it make sense to have a lot of radiation versus no radiation in coffee roasting? Does it matter to rinse the filter or not before you pour? All the kind of things that people talk about on the internet about filter coffee brewing, how much of that actually makes a difference if you did a triangular testing, right? And only the things that makes a difference is worth describing. People love to jump straight to the description because this is where the money is, right? You can really have people spend a lot of money describing something, but it's an awkward question if the difference is even there, right? People try to shy away from that question. So you can see here the first test, the discriminative and the descriptive, that is a laboratory. It's done in the lab. It's done by experts because they are very sensitive, so they can pick out differences. And also they are very good at describing differences in intensities. And if there's relevant differences, then you can go to the market and see who likes what. So that's the essence of consumer science. So you can see this is laboratory work, and this is consumer science. And this is something I actually yesterday evening I was thinking there must be something in engineering and object and also coding where you have to be very careful to keep things compartmentalized. And I found out, then I remembered, I actually changed the battery in my car, and I'm not practically intelligent at all, but I actually could change the battery in my car. Why could I do that? That is because the system as such is compartmentalized, right? So every system have a very, very specific function in the whole system. And if it wasn't respected, then the whole car would break. And it's the same with scientific models like this. You can't just make a little adjustment. The whole thing breaks, right? So if you don't respect that affective data is primarily a consumer data, then the whole model falls apart. And if you're not protecting yourself, that's also in these models, you need to protect the systems from overcomplication and noise. So that's in electronics, that's the first step. And that's the first step here in sensory science is the discriminative. It protects us against noise and overcomplication. So this is a non-negotiable to go with all 3. And also you have to think small businesses, we are iterating ourselves to success, so we need to do some experiments. So the experimentation step here is very important. So you can see here the first 2 steps, that's attributes about the product. The third step is properties of people tasting. So it's very important to keep this distinction. And think about it. If you have got 3 triangles, let's say that you've got light, medium, and dark coffee, you can test in a discrimination test if there's a big enough color difference between those samples to make it relevant to describe them. So you can find the threshold. How many actions do we need? And let's say we find a relevant data set with light, medium, and dark. And in the discriminative test, people could find 4 triangles out of 4 correct. That is the significance threshold. You need to prove that you can do it in 4 triangles, otherwise it could be chance. So that's the first thing. You can do this. You don't need a computer. You don't need a spreadsheet. You don't need software. This is just 4. You can count to 4, right? And that's all it takes to do the discriminative. It's not complicated. The descriptive can also be really simple. Here I've used the CoffeeMind's flavor wheel. You can get that out there, but it could also be SCAs or countercultures. Doesn't matter. You can kind of, okay, I know these are different. And if you can put the differences on a piece, kind of just illustratively here, and then you could separate people out if you're a group of 4 doing this, you can kind of calibrate, and then you can go into individually and do it. And if people are doing the same decision, putting the same cups at the same categories, you've kind of proven that this coffee actually tastes like this, and we can put it on the bag, right? So no software, no spreadsheet, no statistics. You can see it's common sense. And the last one, you can brew the 3, serve them to different people. The thermo that empties first is the winner. No software, no spreadsheet, no statistics. So can you see how this is such a simple, actionable model? Can you see, you don't need to be a scientist, but this is so clear, but if you start violating anything here, then you have a huge problem. And also, if you know about scalability, if you want to scale anything, electronics, systems, businesses, it's very important to have a perfect functional unit, because if you scale, you also scale the problems. Very important. So you need to have a very clear model that you scale, that can be no space for ambiguities, because you'll scale the problems. So this is just to make sure that this is sensory science, and this is why it's successful. And I've actually built software myself the last 6 months, where we can do very advanced data dynamically. So you can add the advanced statistics on top of this. But if you don't have a very, very solid foundation to add your data and statistics, that's the definition of tooth fairy science. Because you can have a lot of data on things that actually doesn't really relate to reality. That's tooth fairy science. So this is where, basically you can do this in a lot of very simple ways. So the last slide before we have the discussion is that one of the things, CoffeeMind, we find ourselves in a world where everything is overcomplicated. And there's a lot of money to be found in overcomplication, because people need to keep on getting education. And this is where CoffeeMind, we feel that we try to make it simpler. And the whole point is, a system doesn't need to be wrong to be unfortunate, because you can see here, this is a model of the solar system, 2 different explanations. One, you assume that the Earth is in the center, and another one, you assume that the sun is in the center. Both of them are correct, because you can make mathematical predictions of all the bodily objects. So it's not that it's wrong, but in science, I think every time there's been a scientific breakthrough, it's because people have made a jump from here to there in all sciences. And this is where I think the best practices, we need to have some models that are really simple so everybody understands them. Otherwise, we end up with something that's not necessarily wrong, but everybody are confused. So, So I think there's a lot of, I think we better go to the discussion now. But this is where I feel that there's a lot of confusion in the CVA system when it comes to what is subjective data and objective data, and what is affective and what is descriptive. So the first thing, my sources, the presentation that Peter Giuliano did at World of Coffee this summer. And one of the things that kind of strikes me as the biggest confusion is, first of all, the discriminative step is skipped. So how do we protect ourselves from noise and overcomplication? How do we leave out things that actually waste our time? That's the first worry. Why don't we train people in testing if things are even worth describing? And another thing is that there's a fundamental misunderstanding on what descriptive analysis is. Yes, descriptive analysis is about intensity measurement of descriptive or of attributes. That's true, but it is not of a single object or a single coffee. It's actually a comparison, fundamentally a comparison. And there's a big difference between that, because if it's just a comparison, it is your local situation. And if it's the other model where you're trying to make a universal description, you don't care about if somebody else across the ocean agree with your description. You just need your description to be good enough for you to work with your customers. So making a system that forces us to think like a centralized organization is not in the interest of individual businesses who need to save time and make sure that what they do locally is relevant for them. So that's a bit worrying, but the most worrying is the ambiguous talk about who is going to do it. Is it the experts or is it the consumers? And it's very vague. It's extremely unclear. And it seems like they still want us that it's the experts that needs to assume. And I've done a lot of consumer research. And in consumer research, you are always surprised about your data. People would say, oh, I love acidity, and then they go for the dark roasted Starbucks or vice versa. And people are always surprised. I've made a system where we do this a lot at a course we do in Copenhagen. People are always surprised. We are always surprised. This is where the interesting information is. Of course, you can kind of try to predict what somebody likes, but the really interesting data is what they actually like. And you cannot assume they know anything about quality. In the assessment form, it says quality. It should be how much they like it. So there's just so many things that I think, as a scientist, I would be extremely worried about scaling this, because it's not out of beta, in my mind, from a kind of conceptual point of view. And it might be that there's a lot of good intentions behind this, but good intentions are not enough. In order for this to not waste the community's time, we need to have a more clear description of the concepts and the methodology used. So now I think I've spent enough time. That is kind of just top of my mind worries as a century scientist who also has a lot of practical experience with businesses and product development.
Fantastic, thank you. And this is why Morten's here, to really stimulate some thinking. I hope there's going to be some good questions to come. And I think what Morten is really highlighting through your experience, and we talked about this briefly last night, is that a lot of your experience is bridging the gap between coffee professionals and product development and consumers. And that is an area, I think, as an industry where we're often we can be a little bit weak, and really understanding how to develop products for consumers is an incredibly important skill. And I think a lot of what you're saying here really applies very specifically to that. I think we also need to think about how we are evaluating coffee in a sensory perspective, and also with the coffee value assessment system for the entire supply chain. So when you actually start applying the different ways in which we're assessing coffee, from the producer end down to the roaster end, the consumer end, then there are so many different applications. If you look at the SCA systems map, you see all the different actors who are involved in the coffee supply chain, or who play into it in some way, shape or form. They all need to get value out of the coffee industry. So if you're a producer and you are contemplating whether to soak your coffee for 20 hours or 36 hours, you need an evaluation tool that will allow you to do that. So you can use the descriptive form, which is a more objective assessment. You rank the intensity. You might want to bring out more florality, or you might want to bring out more mouthfeel, so you need to grade the intensity. So you can use the descriptive form for that. So do small experiment, put your coffee in 20 hours, 36 hours, and then rate the intensity of the attributes that you're looking for the different markets. That is I think when you start thinking and applying the coffee value assessment system to specific purposes, you find that there is a form that you need to use with a specific purpose for what you need where you are in the market. And So if you think about a producer or selling to an exporter thinking about how they're going to sell to an importer or to a roaster, everyone is doing different roles. An exporter is taking coffee from a regional lot. They're trying to create the same flavor profile. They might use the affective form because they're thinking, I have this coffee and I've got all these different coffees. I want to create a profile of from 100 different farms in a specific region. I want to make this coffee taste with citrus notes, with medium body, with it has to have organic certification because I know that this market over here wants that kind of coffee. And so they can create, when they're buying those coffees from all those different farmers, they're thinking about who their audience is, who's going to buy this coffee. And that's not a consumer research role. That you don't need to do discriminative testing for that, in my opinion. And it's not necessarily a descriptive assessment, it's an affective assessment of all those coffees to think, who is the audience, who am I going to sell this to, what coffees do I need to buy to provide that. And you can go through and you can think about how a roaster would apply the different forms as well. Because there are lots of different purposes. And I think there's probably more roasters in the room here, so you're thinking, there is a product development role which you might use the affective form for, but there's also a profiling role which you use the form for. And there's also a standards that's been set which define how the coffee value assessment system is supposed to be used in terms of roast level and the protocol for cupping. So that is defined. So you can, we have to think as well about not stretching the purpose of the system and the standard that's being created beyond its purpose as well.
Yeah, and to be sure, I completely agree that the CVA system is a big improvement over the 2004 quality scoring. And the 2004 quality scoring, the problem was that it was completely isolated over here in the preferences, but without a clear understanding of what is the relationship between the preferences of the Q graders and the customers. So that was kind of lost over here, I would say. So it's a huge step to have the descriptive that's only looking for intensities. So for sure, it's a huge step ahead, and it opens up a completely different world to include this. I would say though that if you actually do an experiment at origin about how many hours you need to ferment, the discriminative test is designed to give you an idea of how long it takes. So it's still a noise and overcomplication safeguard that we do not have. Because people think they could skip it, right? And there's a huge danger from an educational perspective to not have that. And why skip it? It's part of the big breakthrough, and so yes, the CVA system is a big step ahead of the 2004 form. But Sensory Science is 50 years old, so I don't understand why the system is kind of so caught up in the legacy of the 2004, that in my opinion, and I've said this on the internet already, is a catastrophe. So why kind of stay too much in a legacy that was just extremely unhelpful? I think why don't we just skip it altogether and not try to invent our own models, where we are not taking the discriminative and then put quality on the form, right? In consumer science, there's a concept that is called naivety. If you are getting data from a consumer, they are per definition naive. That means they have no idea about anything. The only thing they can tell you is how much they like it. They have no concept of quality. If you ask about quality, you don't know what it is. And funny enough, we actually did an behavioral economic study that is 2015 at RICO. We showed that in a study of 209 people who were correctly able to point out a higher quality coffee still preferred to walk away with a low quality as the free gift. So the second that you talk about quality to a consumer, it's not a consumer study anymore. So you can only ask them about what do they like. And trying to come up with a different kind of tweaking it a bit, I think is it, for me, at least it's just in the talks I've seen, it's just talked interchangeably at liking quality scoring, or it's kind of scored by the expert or the consumer. It's too vague, and there's a reason that this is a success, and that vagueness is not scalable without time wasting. So, and that's what worries me. We don't have the noise safeguard, and it's still very unclear what the data is, who scores them, and that makes it very unclear what to use the data for. So I completely acknowledge it's a big step forward, but it's taking it out of beta now. For me, it's just it's definitely a bad idea if we want to scale this. So perhaps we should have some comments. It's not that I don't want you to comment on that, but perhaps we should go to the... You have one? Okay. Is this the microphone or...
Hello, hi, Thomas. Super fascinating discussion. I want to ask a question, which is, you seem to be kind of arguing against the scale system, mainly on the basis that it creates confusion, it's not rigorous, but is there not also an ethical, or almost you can say industry political element to this? I'm particularly interested in who gets to score the effective stuff, who gets to do the points part. Yeah, because we know this from other food industries, yeah? There's a certain risk that the more you kind of close down queue cupping and sort of scoring around a small elite, the harder it gets to do genuine innovation, to break the rules. It's going to be inbuilt. It's a different type of noise. It's an elite type of noise that emerges in the system. So coffee's now at a place where we're using a lot of techniques now from the natural wine world. I think the natural wine kind of revolution is an example of trying to push back against exactly this type of kind of like what happened with Robert Parker and Madari, and suddenly stuff started tasting very similar. Madari's a great producer. So I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts on sort of like that aspect.
I have a comment. You
go?
Okay.
I'll
because in a sense, your question, Thomas, is who benefits? And because I have been, as I said, I've been really thinking a lot about this recently, and I remember this from I studied philosophy, and I remember that was some kind of lingo, right? That things could have been said easier, but by saying it very difficult and using the right terms, you kind of distance yourself as more intelligent than somebody else. And I thought there must be somebody who's thought deeply about this. And then I found Bourdieu, who kind of talks very much about this. He's got a whole research area that talks about the social and the symbolic and cultural value of taste. So if you kind of, so there he studied art, particularly in France, but also I think he's got data from even Algeria and kind of understood how this kind of, what is the economical, and how you can then translate your social, cultural values into real money, right? So, I didn't want to say that because we are going into too much conspiracy theory here. But in a sense, if there's confusion, who benefits? And it's very clear in the old queue system who benefits, right? And Bourdieu calls it social violence. To tell farmers, this is the number, this is the price I want to pay, and then often magically that number is going up when you start selling. So that's what Bourdieu calls social violence, because you are by having monopoly on taste, you can create these systems that people need to invest a lot and be part of the system before they can even question it. So there's some really interesting social dynamics here that I didn't even dare to go into. But since Thomas he asked,
this is where we all agree.
Sorry?
And this is where we all agree. I mean, the 2004 form had a singular number, a score, and that score is in contracts. And so if a coffee arrives and it's below that score, then you can renegotiate the contract and the price. That power dynamic is very much in the hands of the buyer. And then, as Morten says, that you're the roaster, and you're like, actually, we thought it was an 84, but we're selling it as an 86. And that's a very singular view of quality in a coffee. The affective scoring system, the new affective sheet, that score is an impression of quality. It's no longer saying this score is an 86. It's saying, I like this coffee. I'm giving it an 86 because I want you to understand that these attributes are what I qualify as an 86. It doesn't mean that anyone else calls it an 86, and you could actually say it's an 86 in that market and it's a 70 in that market. So you can score it completely differently. And it's purely a conversation between the person you're buying the coffee from, and it could be a conversation that you have with the person you're selling coffee to if you want to use scoring as a way to market the coffee that you're selling. But it's no longer got the sort of power dynamic of, I define the quality and I disagree with your assessment, but I'm buying, so I'm going to tell you how much I'm going to pay for it. And what we're finding as well is that the new system is being adopted by producing countries with a lot more enthusiasm than the old system. So they're moving away from the 2004 form. They're very happy to see this. They understand that it is all about equitable value distribution across the value chain. So it's a great question.
Yeah, just to be sure that I'm just not at all grumpy man, I completely agree, and the new system definitely opens up this in exactly the way, so it's not everything we disagree on.
If I may also add a perspective, I don't exist on the producer side, I exist on the trader side, so I have been an authorized specialty trainer for about 6 years now, and when the new form came out, it was actually really exciting because it came about language and sensory language and provided a really great structure. So I can't speak to who benefits, but I can speak to how my students and how we interact with the form has changed dramatically. And it's gone from finding a number and everyone kind of really painfully agreeing on what the number might be, to using very clear the catalyst and exploring what that means for us. We're using the effective form of the impression of quality. So even from a completely different perspective, not from the purchasing or the green trade or the contract side, using it as a training tool is really incredibly effective as well. I'm on the side, I'm just providing my perspective. But I'm also very conscious of time. I know you guys want to talk more. This is a really great topic. Do we have a couple more minutes? No? Okay. It's out of my hands.
So actually, I've just had a graphic made, and that's not to make fun of anybody, but I actually had this, I received it this morning. So as kind of a graphic illustration of what the problem might be. And this is, I see sensory science as a simple tools for simple purposes. And if you have simple tools for simple purposes, you can be very efficient. And it's very dangerous to start creating kind of merged tools, because you might get some nails in, but they are all over the place and it's not very efficient. So I'm just worried, and I'm not saying this is the case, but I'm worried that the community will end up with tools like this if we think we can improve the scientific distinctions that has really made it. So that was just, I wanted to kind of illustrate my worry.
Yeah, and I'll just finish by building on this and saying that the old system was launched in 2004. The new system was launched in 2023. This will not be a static system. There will not be another 20-year gap between the improvements for the existing version of the Coffee Value Assessment system today and what it becomes in a year or 2 years' time. So why we wanted to present to you today is to stimulate some discussion, to make you think about it, to learn about the Coffee Value Assessment system. Go away, read the protocol, use it, do the courses, watch the videos. Take into account everything Morten said, build on that, and feedback
but don't
to the
be
SCA.
creative.
Yeah.
Thank you
So
so much.
thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.